Nice to see you. Yes. Sandra is an old friend. Oh, really?
Good morning, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, and partners, and dear friends. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to this special session on partnerships for gender equality titled The Time is Now, Partnerships and Innovative Financing to Close the Gender Gap. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation to join this important session that we are hosting as part of the Beijing+25 Asia-Pacific Ministerial Meeting. As we start our event, please allow me to invite Ms. Anita Bhatia, Deputy Executive Director and Assistant Secretary General, Resource Management, Sustainability and Partnerships, UN Women, to deliver the welcoming remarks.
Thank you very much, Isabel. A very good morning to all of you. Good morning. It's great to see you all here. Welcome to this panel. The key issue that we're going to discuss in the panel today is the issue of partnerships for gender equality. And the reason that I think this topic is so important is because gender equality is something that cannot be achieved by member states working alone. And I think everything that we're seeing in this regional review is reinforcing the need for us to be able to do this collectively. The gender equality agenda is too large, too complex, and most importantly, too important to be done by any one segment of a country or by any one segment of a regional configuration or any one segment of a global community. This is an agenda that is a universal agenda, and it requires participation from member states, from business, from the civil society, from young people, and from people of all ages, colors, caste, creed, and abilities. This has to be an inclusive agenda. It has to include girls, women, men, boys, and all genders. That's what true partnership means. I want to say something about what I, coming into UN Women just 4 months ago, have noted about this complex agenda of gender equality and women's empowerment. So because I'm new, I can ask stupid questions, and I can ask questions about very basic things. So one of the things that I found myself asking was, when Beijing took place 25 years ago, how much money was attached to this? Who actually committed to putting resources behind making sure that those results were achieved? And I think one of the wonderful things about Beijing was that it was very aspirational. Many of you, I think, were at Beijing and would have seen how it changed the world's discourse on gender equality. But what Beijing didn't have were actual financing commitments attached to those aspirations. And I think one other thing to note since Beijing is that at that time, the voice of civil society was really strong, and member states were pushed, I think, in a very good way by civil society to articulate and to take on ambitions and aspirations. But one actor was really absent at the table in Beijing, and that actor was the private sector and business. And I think one of the big things that has happened in development over the last 25 years is the emergence of the private sector as an actor in development. This has been recognized by the UN system in the articulation of the framework of financing for development, which really calls on the private sector to step up and play its appropriate role in shaping and ensuring real outcomes through the SDG framework. So for us, it is actually a very welcome development that we see business and corporates involved in the SDG agenda. But we have to make that involvement real, and we have to make sure that there is no pinkwashing and that the private sector isn't simply saying that they are going to take actions towards gender equality, but are actually doing the things that move the needle. So I think this panel discussion will offer some insights into how that process is working, what more can be done, and how we can all collectively make sure that we are pushing the world towards achieving real results in the area of gender equality. In conclusion, let me just say that UN Women recognizes that partnerships are the key mode for making results really happen. We work with the private sector extensively. We have something called the Women's Empowerment Principles, where companies sign up and make commitments on how they are going to implement gender equality within their corporation, but also through their supply chain, their distributor chain, their customer chain. So that's one approach. We also have an alliance called the Unstereotype Alliance, where we work with media, marketing, and advertising companies to change mindsets, attitudes, and norms around gender equality. We also work with the private sector through campaigns such as He for She, where we nominate men and boys to be champions of gender equality. So UN Women actually works with partnerships as a key part of its DNA. And I think that approach is something that we would like to scale up and to do more of. So with those words, let me just conclude my opening remarks by asking all of us to think through, as we listen to the panel today, what is it that each of us can do in our particular sphere of work and influence to ensure that we are bringing a partnership approach in order to achieve greater impact and faster results with more urgency for gender equality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bhatia, for your very warm welcome remarks. So dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to introduce our moderator for today. Please welcome Mr. Mohammed Nakiri, UN Women Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific. From 2015 to 2018, he was the Regional Director of UN Women in the Arab States. And from 2012 to 2015, Mr. Nakiri was a Deputy Regional Director for UN Women in the Arab States. Mohammed has extensive experience in gender and development issues. Prior to joining UN Women, he was a Deputy Country Director of UNDP in Yemen, where he supported the country in the formulation of its gender strategy and the gender-responsive budgeting process. Mohammed has worked in Kuwait, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Cambodia, dealing with issues from human trafficking to ethnic cleansing. Mohammed, the stage is yours.
It was a very formal introduction, so I go by Mohammed, and many tell me Mo. So, hello. I'm a man, but also a feminist, and it shouldn't be but. I am a man and a feminist. And I'm not here to lead, I'm here to facilitate the agency and the leadership and the access of all of us here. And I'm very, very proud to continue to be led by very powerful women and feminists. So I'm very, very honored to be here today. Speaking as a feminist, I will say we, as the feminist movement, started almost more than a century ago. A lot has been done, struggle, fights, pushing for equality, for rights. We have achieved a lot. There is definitely improvement on education, on health, many of the fronts, but until now, more than 100 years later, not a single member state, not a single country can say that they have achieved gender equality. None, which is very unfortunate. A lot of support from the feminist and the women's rights movement have been put there, but it's a sign that we will not be able to go anywhere until we, all of us, are on the table, we all of us join hands to make sure that this happens. Until now, the whole global aid business, the women's rights and the gender equality benefits only from around 1% of it, nothing more. We do rely a lot on the countries and the governments. It's definitely their prime responsibility, and the governments are not going to do it alone. We need the civil society, we need the private sector, we need the individuals, we need the philanthropies to be all on board. Until now, we still have many countries, every country, still falling behind on labor force representation, wage and pay gap, political representation, and every woman in 3 is suffering from and have faced sexual violence and violence against her in her lifetime. So it's just about time to think differently about how can we partner, how can we finance, and how can we get more allies for the agenda and for pushing forward. And that's why our panel today is a very composite, hybrid, eclectic panel from senior members of government to senior business figures to coalitions that are coming together to try to make things better. And allow me here maybe to start inviting the panelists to the floor, starting with Your Excellency Lee Yong-ok, the Minister of the Gender Equality and Family Government of the Republic of Korea. Please. Our strong EU champion, ambassador, supporter, Ambassador Satu Sukurai-Kleven, the ambassador of Finland to Thailand, also the champion of for gender for the EU in Thailand. Jeff Senior, the chargé d'affaires of the Embassy of Canada, yet another feminist government, strong supporters of the equality agenda. The Asian Development Bank, Ms. Sonomi Tanaka, who has always been trying to work on integrating gender in the work of the Asian Development Bank and the international financial institutions. Pleasure. Ms. Caroline McLaughlin, the Chief Partnership Officer for the Asian Venture Philanthropy Network. And last but not least, Mr. Patrick Bassett, the COO for Upper Southeast and Northeast Asia for Accor. Excellent to have you all. Maybe I can start the conversation, the discussion, with posing a question to Your Excellency and say, what are the new initiatives or mechanisms that the government of the Republic of Korea have launched to facilitate the financing for the gender equality initiatives in Korea and beyond?
So first, I would like to express my gratitude for inviting me to this special session on partnership for gender equality under the topic of time is now. So, and for the innovative financing to close a gender gap. First, I will touch the Korean ODA and also related with the all ODA, official development assistance in the area of gender equality. So promoting gender equality is now considered one of the important goals in ODA project for integrated economic growth of developing countries. It is also seen as one of the most powerful drivers for global growth. For this reason, countries around the world are making efforts to increase financial resources dedicated to ODA programs on gender equality. So Korea also tried to follow this kind of a global trend. So we have a late participant in OECD DAC memberships. So in 2009, we have joined this global partnership. Korea Women's Organization and also our ministry try very hard for the Korean government to allocate more budget to ODA programs in a more gender-sensitive way and towards more gender equality. So now we have started 2009, and at that time it was from the all ODA funds, so gender equality funds has composed 5.7 point in 2009, but to 2017 it has increased 13.2%. But comparing with the global standard on gender equality fund within the AC, it is around 38%. So still there is a lot of things for us to go forward. So that is the one way we can try very hard to fill the gender gap within the ODA. So one of the strong arguments that we can use, we have a far behind the global standard, 38%, because we still under 13%. That is the main argument. And the second point, the increase the size of the gendered ODA budget, but also we want to see the quality of ODA budget. So sometimes the gendered budget are named after, but when we do some kind of serious monitoring, it is not exactly gendered one. Sometimes construction of bridges and other infrastructure building was named after gendered budget. So we want to see the the quality of a gendered budget also. So, and also, as already mentioned, our UN women leaders, so this kind of activities cannot be done by one government or one ministry, so it needs some kind of a collective work regionally, and especially women and women partnership from the donor country to recipient country. I thought it is very powerful argument to increase the budget on gender-sensitive ODA way. And the other thing is the civil society partnership. So that is related with the women to women partnership building. Civil society use the money very effectively comparing with the G2G way. So in Korea, we have this kind of framework for all the civil society who have interested in this kind of ODA activities. There are 80 NGOs usually have registers annually to do their own program through our ODA money. So we are very actively promoted this kind of civil society partnership building to fill the gender gap within the ODA area. But still, as we try to challenge for the private sector, the corporate companies, and they did their own activities for gender-friendly way, but sometimes it is for their own image of company. So let them be more socially responsible rather than interested by their own company, own interest. So still we are negotiating, let them be more visible in this social agenda, especially globally accepted agenda of gender equality. So that is our coming tasks for my ministry and for Korean women's movement, many CSO organizations to be engaged for fulfill our 2013 agenda for all the global society be more sustainable. So, so maybe let's go forward together.
Thank you, Madam Minister. It's very reassuring to see an activist minister. It's very reassuring for us to see how are you going to, one, push for the civil society to take more space in the work on the gender equality agenda on the ground, taking note of the advancements that Korea has taken, but also acknowledging that we still have a way to go. And it's a message to us as UN Women. We've been pushing for the gender responsive budgeting to member states. I think it's just about time that we also hold the UN system accountable, and maybe we can speak with our Secretary General to look into a gender responsive budgeting model for the UN. Maybe we can get the member states to support us behind that. So, moving to you, Ambassador Satu, you're not only the ambassador of Finland here in Thailand, but you're also our gender champion who's speaking on behalf of the EU on gender equality and women's rights issues. Can you share examples of how the government of Finland has partnered with the private and public sectors to fund gender equality initiatives?
Thank you so much. I'm very glad to be here and wearing my two hats as the EU's gender champion and as a Finnish ambassador. The gender equality and women's economic empowerment are very much in the heart of the policies of both the European Union and Finland. And this is both internally and externally. We look into our own situations. There's still a lot to do both in Finland and in European Union in general, but then it's also a very, very important part of our foreign policy and our development cooperation. So I would like to touch a little bit about both systems, perhaps starting with starting with an example from the EU on the partnerships, and of course both for Finland and the EU. I mean, the way we have done been financing gender equality work for a long time, it's basically always been in partnerships. But we have realized exactly the same as you were mentioning before, of the need for more and more innovative partnerships. And from the EU, I wanted to mention a big project. It's the European Union and the United Nations, the Spotlight initiative, for gender equality, for elimination of violence against women, and through that increasing the economic empowerment as well. And it's a very big in monetary terms as well. 500 initial investment, about 500 million euros. And here in Asia, under the Spotlight initiative, we started 2 years ago this the Safe and Fair project to support migrant women. And of course, a lot of work has been done by all the partners. But I think that really the strength of this is to bring everybody on board. The UN, of course, UN Women and ILO in this project, of course, being particularly important, and then with governments and civil society organizations, the service providers, and of course the migrant workers and the employers, to get them together. And perhaps, for instance, just to give an example, that a few months ago there was the big stock-taking event where where all the different actors from the different ASEAN countries were brought together. It sounds like self-evident. Of course they are talking with each other all the time, but it's actually not the case. It's actually very often realize that this is not the case. Not not among the sort of the different actors with each other, but even within organizations themselves, it sometimes take an extra effort to put all those working on the same issue together. So this initiative is very much based on that kind of a philosophy, and the forms, cooperation forms, and the activity forms. So, for instance, they are migrant research centers, where then the women get very concrete, useful the advice on their rights, how to get justice if your rights have been violated, where to find social security, where to find the different resources, where to find legal assistance. And also to help to support the migrant women and their organizations to get organized better, so that they can better then together advocate for their rights. So this is the first in this region is the fair and safe and fair for the migrant workers, and then there will be another one early that started already on elimination of domestic violence in the Pacific region, and next year there will be Central Asia and Afghanistan program as well. Then when it comes to the private sector and more the entrepreneurship, the EU together with UN Women again has the We Empower Asia joint program of 8 million euros, and this is an EU foreign policy instrument. And this is the goal is to increase women's economic empowerment. And by opening up opportunities for engagement with the private sector. And there are basically three big goals: to create an enabling business environment for women's economic empowerment, by forming policies and sharing expertise and knowledge, and secondly, to strengthen capacity of women business owners and entrepreneurs, and third, to support the take-up in the implementation of the women empowerment principles that the regional director just referred to by more companies. So these are some of the examples that the European Union is doing together with UN Women and other UN organizations. And then when it comes to Finland, if I briefly can say that well, gender equality is very much in the heart of both our foreign policy and development cooperation, as well as one of our four goals. And number one them is actually promotion of gender equality. Partnerships there as well has always been really the guiding principle on how we do it. But we have realized that the traditional ways are not always enough there either. So a few years ago we started a new kind of a financing instrument called the new types of investments that we invest it's called the development policy investment. The main purpose behind these investments is to help allocate capital to entrepreneurial activities which create employment. And the motivation and the driver behind is that the realizations and even very good companies, often in developing, or especially in LDCs, have difficulties in growing and creating more and more work because of the lack of capital, lack of financing. So this project aims to tackle this challenge, to really seek those entrepreneurs and companies in developing countries and to invest in those. And one of the key areas there as well is the increasing women's entrepreneurship under this program. Then we have it's a totally it's a civil society organization called Women's Bank. It's the organization created by a group of Finnish businesswomen who realized that how much they actually could do to trigger entrepreneurship of women in poorer countries, and so they started this which has grown into quite a wonderful, inspiring movement. It's not only sort of a funding, but it's also mentoring and learning from each other. This is and then they are also seeking partnerships in this part of the world as well currently. And then one more that I wanted to mention is when we think about SDG 5 or any other SDGs, we need the whole society, of course, everybody involved very much. So what we created a number of years ago is called Commitment 2050, and it's an internet-based sort of a platform that encourages everybody to make a concrete commitment to advance SDGs, and and they have been actually what is very encouraging is that the biggest single group of those who commitment makers is private companies. They have really come forward on different fields, and many on gender equality as well. Sort of making concrete commitments when it comes to their employment practices and many others. So this is something, and also individuals can make. And I got so inspired that I also with we made one with my family here, but that's on climate change. But so these are just some glimpses of the sort of a new type of activities and partnerships in the EU and Finland.
And I followed your climate change initiative as a family. So.
Okay. Yeah.
But again, from two different institutions, it's all about not how we do it alone, but how we do it with the others. And you've definitely provided us with an opportunity as the UN system to work better together under the Spotlight Initiative. So, as you rightly said, we're working here as UN Women and ILO. In other settings, there are other agencies working together as well to achieve and to go for the target, maybe with different kind of work and implementation on the ground. The initiative that you've referred to from the foreign policy instrument is yet another way to think about innovative partners, because traditionally in the European Union, the foreign policy instrument is not necessarily a traditional office to fund this type of work. But this is the first initiative that the European foreign policy instrument is doing to fund gender equality initiatives. The work that Finland has been doing for so long, how you have been looking for the development policy investments, how can you bring more on board, and how can you invest more in entrepreneurs beyond and outside of Finland? And finally, the women's banks. So thinking innovatively, thinking how can we bring more partners on board to do the task, because it would be very naive of us to assume that any of us can do it on our own, given how exhaustive the challenges are. Canada, yet another feminist government, feminist prime minister. You've been doing a lot on the partnerships and the financing for the gender equality and women's rights agenda, but not only as the Canadian government, you've also been encouraging the Canadian private sector and enterprise to do work on that. If you may shed more light, Jeff, on this.
Happily so, and thank you, Mohammed, and guests, distinguished panelists, for being here today. I think I'll continue in that vein. What I have are 6 specific examples of things Canada's done in the last 4 or 5 years in this area. But I do think it's a very interesting and exciting conversation that for Canada hits on 2 key areas of emphasis and priority. One is gender equality, of course, which I'll turn to in a minute. But for reasons that slightly escape me as a Canadian, we also have particular strength in international finance and banking. And so when you get into the area of innovative development financing today, we have streams of experts in Canada that are very excited about that, working with other streams of experts from gender equality. And it's really in Canada fertilizing an interesting conversation within my ministry, but far beyond that. So we're delighted to be here. Thank you for the invitation. So I'll give you the 6 examples in a minute, but before doing that, what I wanted to do is just mention 2 things very broadly about the broader frame for Canada in terms of this, where this intersection between development financing and gender equality sits, because they're important for us to state. And I think these will be well understood in this room. As has already been mentioned, my government has a feminist foreign policy and a feminist international assistance policy. This puts women and girls at the heart of what we do internationally, in diplomacy, in development, in trade, in security. It's targeted, it's mainstreamed. And we believe that advancing gender equality and empowering women and girls is the most effective way to eliminate poverty. That is at the core of the policy. It's the most effective way to create and sustain peace and to achieve sustainable development. And undeniably, these are the most important goals we could set for ourselves collectively on the planet today. When our former ministers launched these policies, they noted that focusing on gender equality was both the right thing to do and the smart thing to do, a matter of both justice and of economics. So we uphold and advance women's rights, and in doing so unleash economic contributions from which societies reap enormous benefit. And I think that understanding is widely shared in this room. But I wanted to mention that as the broader policy framework within which my government is acting. The second point is broad as well. In terms of how we work toward our shared international goals, the SDGs and other goals, on gender equality and in peace, security, trade and development more broadly, Canada is a staunch believer in what we call the rules-based international order. Agreement on shared principles, rules and goals to guide international conduct and the creation of bodies like the United Nations and the Bretton Woods institutions have generated tremendous progress in the world in which we all live, even if, as we all recognize here, the benefits of that progress have not been evenly shared. So our concern today is that these institutions are under stress, not only in financial terms, but also in terms of the perceptions of their legitimacy and their efficacy. and from unilateral actions that have the effect of undercutting multilateralism. Exclusion is a key challenge in our assessment, be it from parts of the planet or segments of our societies who feel disadvantaged or left behind when it comes to the benefits of global growth and multilateralism. And so as a proposed antidote, the second thing I wanted to mention is that what you'll find in Canada's international policies is a very strong emphasis on the themes of inclusion, innovation, expansion of opportunity as a way to stabilize and revitalize multilateral order in today's world. And so further reflection on how we go toward the SDGs and Agenda 2030 is really needed. Now, more specifically, how can we use innovative financing instruments to close gender gaps as part of this agenda? Well, we know Agenda 2030 requires enormous political and financial capital. My government wants to act as a catalyst on both fronts, so with strong political leadership from the government on one side, but matched by resources and a call to action in developing new approaches. In order to back the commitment with resources, Canada is increasing our development assistance by $2 billion over 5 years to implement our feminist international assistance policy. But we recognize that public finance won't be sufficient. We recognize we must work in collaboration with the private sector, private investors, civil society organizations, multilateral institutions to mobilize capital, to align it with sustainable development goals, and keep a sharp eye on effectiveness. The amount of capital matters, but achieving results is the ultimate aim. So one of the important things we can do in this context is to free up capital for investments in support of the SDGs in frontier and emerging markets. So in this context, the Canadian government is trying new things. We're adopting flexible and innovative approaches in our funding and development assistance. We're building new partnerships and engaging the private sector. Here are some of the examples, the 6 I wanted to work through at the start. Example number 1. 4 years ago in 2015, after Addis Ababa, Canada worked with others to help create and fund Convergence, a global platform to encourage blended finance opportunities. It helps to connect, educate, and support public, philanthropic, and private investors. And I strongly encourage a visit to their website. It's an excellent introduction to blended finance, and statistics on this today. Example number 2. Since 2015, Canada has provided $440 million to the World Bank's Global Financing Facility for health and nutrition of women, children, and adolescents. The innovation in this approach is well known in this room. You take modest grant injections from the Global Trust Fund and match them with national and other contributions to scale up investments in high impact but underfunded areas of health. The aim is to avoid up to 5 million preventable deaths each year. Example number 3. In 2018, the Government of Canada launched FinDev Canada. This is a new development finance institution that we now have. It provides easier access to capital for entrepreneurs operating in developing markets. FinDev focuses on local development, women's economic empowerment, and climate action. It looks first at social and economic impact and offers different types of financial services, loans, guarantees, equity included. FinDev applies a gender lens to 100% of its transactions. It steers capital toward those with high impact on women's economic empowerment or supports client companies to become more gender inclusive. Example number 4. As host of the G7 last year, Canada and FinDev Canada and other development finance institutions announced the 2X Challenge, a commitment to direct $3 billion in US dollars toward businesses that benefit women as entrepreneurs, leaders, employees, and consumers. The impetus for this challenge included a number of jolting observations. At current rates, it would take over 200 years to close gender economic gaps. Upwards of 2/3 of women entrepreneurs in developing nations and women-led businesses have limited or no access to financial services. Under this challenge, just under $2.5 billion has been committed, and FinDev Canada has already concluded 3 investments as part of the initiative. And this includes, for example, investments in gender lens funds and women-led investment funds that help to finance the activities of small and medium-sized enterprises in Latin America and Africa. Example 5. In June 2019, following an external selection process, Canada announced on the margins of the Women Deliver Conference in Vancouver its commitment to work with the Equality Fund. The original idea here was very simple. Build the world's largest fund for women and girls to provide a predictable and flexible source of funding for women's organizations. The main purpose of the fund is to generate and distribute resources to support women's organizations and movements in developing countries. Recipients will be civil society organizations with a primary mandate to advance women's rights, gender equality, and the empowerment of women and girls in ODA-eligible countries. I think according to OECD statistics of the money that is earmarked for gender equality, something like 0.5% is actually directed toward women's rights organizations. The Equality Fund is an unusual structure. It's a consortium of Canadian and international organizations that brings together private sector, philanthropists, civil society, and governments, and they engage in grant making, investing, and philanthropy. With an initial contribution from the Government of Canada of $300 million, the Equality Fund has already mobilized commitments of an additional $100 million from Canadian and other international foundations and aims to attract more than $1 billion in resources over 15 years. So the Equality Fund today is currently in a design and implementation phase. Modest grant allocations to women's organizations are expected in 2020, and they're supposed to increase over time. The final example, number 6, tackling the challenges faced by women entrepreneurs will also require new approaches, including the development of innovative financing mechanisms drawing on public and private financial resources. As an example of work in this area, Canada is pleased to be providing financial support for an initiative spearheaded by UN ESCAP entitled Catalyzing Women's Entrepreneurship. The initiative works at multiple levels to stimulate change with a main focus on access to financing, technology, and policy and legal change that will assist women entrepreneurs across the region to access capital and services they need to grow their businesses. A concrete example of the work supported through this initiative is the launch of a FinTech Innovation Fund to pilot digital and financial solutions to improve access to finance or to enhance operations of women-led businesses. For an interesting example of some of the projects selected by this fund, have a look at iFarmer in Bangladesh, which links investors with farmers via a digital platform with some very impressive annual rates of return on investment, upwards of 40% in some cases. Or have a look at Ramoni Services, also in Bangladesh, which links service providers with clients in a way that is similar to what Uber and Grab have done for transportation services. These are fintech solutions that have tremendous promise and potential over time, and we hope to see a very positive impact on women entrepreneurs across the Asia-Pacific region. In conclusion, there's a number of common denominators in these examples that speak to how Canada is seeking to advance gender equality through innovative financing. And these include the following: deploying gender lens investment strategies to address gender disparities and inform investment decisions, seeking new forms of partnership and financing while engaging partners that directly address gender equality, embedding gender markers throughout the life cycle of investments, ensuring partners know how to do gender analysis and measure progress, ensuring gender analysis is conducted and used to influence how capital is being deployed and received in order to achieve gender equitable outcomes, developing gender-sensitive indicators and collecting relevant data to inform decision-making, and encouraging investors to do likewise. I look forward to hearing the insights of other panelists on the role that innovation can play in supporting gender equality.
Thank you, Jeff. This is quite comprehensive, and I think the starting point of that it's not only the right thing to do, it's a smart thing to do, was an entry point to bring more Canadian actors on board and working on these 6 different streams, from the blended finance to more flexible financing on the women economic empowerment, the 2X challenge, the fintech solutions and innovation, and building the world's largest fund, equality fund for gender equality. The last is a good segue into the IFIs, which is the matched contributions under the umbrella of the IFIs and the working with the World Bank. And this brings me to the Asian Development Bank, Sonomi. What and how are you engaging the different institutions and stakeholders in promoting some of the innovative financing instruments from the IFIs for accelerating access to finance for women?
Well, thank you, Mohammed, and thank you very much for the organizer, UN Women, and also UN ESCAP for this invitation. It means a lot for me to be here on this table. Started my gender journey in 1995, 1995 in Beijing. So I feel pretty much really privileged to be here and then staying on in this gender field. A lot has happened, also not has happened enough. So it is a very important moment for us to discuss this. So for those of you who are not too familiar with how the multilateral development banks, like the Asian Development Bank, works, so we are the development finance institutions, and the Asian Development Bank looks at the Asia-Pacific countries. So we have 64 member countries, and 49 of them are the regional member countries. Our main role is to provide the development finance through lending, grants, and other financing instruments mostly to public sector, but also increasingly so to the private sector. And we lend about, per year, the new lending comes at $22 billion, and 19 billion of that is public sector. 3 of them is to the private sector. And the sectors that we cover are the infrastructure, as you know, urban development, water supply, energy, transport, and we also provide support to education, health, social protection, agriculture, agribusiness, and the finance sector, as well as the public sector management. So our development finance range is quite huge. So I will be talking about our support to finance sector, but it will be important that that's a very small part of our business in providing development finance, particularly development finance that will work for gender equality, because we have our own measuring system of how much of our money will contribute to gender equality, and we have the target by the year 2030 that is 75% of our projects for both public and the private sector will proactively contribute to gender equality. So it is a very ambitious target that we have, and ADB is all working towards this joint effort. So on the financing instruments, before I talk about that, I think it's important for us to know that access to finance is not enough for women entrepreneurs and women in business, women doing. They're not just necessarily leading small, medium enterprises, but also those who are the individual entrepreneurs or business owners. So I will talk about the financing instruments, but at the same time, it is very important to look at the financial literacy, business skills, looking at the infrastructure and digitization availability to make business registration, the online businesses, and so on possible to conduct the business, as well as the policy reforms. So on the financing instruments, we do through both public sector with the government guarantee, but also directly to the private sector, banks, SME, small and medium enterprise, or micro, small, medium enterprise lending. So it's an on-lending of a line of credits to these banks, commercial banks, or the financial institutions. Normally, we put target of lending to women-led enterprises, women-led or women-owned enterprises when we do the on-lending to these commercial banks. But that's not sufficient, as you can see. So as a Canadian representative also mentioned, blended finance is becoming an important tool, and thanks to some of the donor support, including Canada, we have had recently an opportunity in the past 2 years to use multilateral development bank trust fund called WEFI, Women Entrepreneurs Financing Initiative. And so that provides grants opportunity to be blended with our usual lending operation loans that are to be provided to the commercial banks. So that will give incentives for commercial banks to either to de-risk the part of the risk that they have in lending money to women's businesses, because lack of collaterals and the small sizes and not having a credit history, they are disadvantaged compared to male-led enterprises. So there is hesitance of the commercial banks to lend money to women's businesses, and this creates some more space for the commercial banks to further provide financing to the women-led enterprises. In the Asian Development Bank, we're supporting the government of Sri Lanka and also the Fiji. For Sri Lanka, we are doing the on-lending to the commercial banks of 10 local banks using this blended financing with the mixing of the grants and loans and also government guarantees. But in Fiji, we are in the process of getting the commercial banks to issue the gender bond. So they will further, using the blended financing, so they will further lend money to women businesses, women enterprises. Another way that we're looking at are the ways to provide non-collateralized lending to women's businesses, and some of the microfinance and the small SME financing trying out a psychometric technology so that the credit history is not required as part of the eligibility. Other means could be, for example, we have been supporting in the some of the Pacific countries and passing the law called Secured Transaction Acts, which will allow banks not to require collaterals for the small-scale lending for women. Particularly, it's useful for women enterprises. Instead of requiring that fixed assets like land, rather, they require movable assets such as equipment or crops produced or receivable accounts and so on. So this is creating a lot of opportunities for women to have access to money. So we are looking at the different opportunities and then financing instruments, and one final thing I would like to say is that through our private sector company support, and in particularly banking sector, and also the private equity funds support, we have been requiring our participating banks. We have been actually promoting our participating banks. For example, trade financing program that we have. So we have a network of over 200 different banks across which are supporting a trade finance across borders and so on. So some of them participating in a gender audit that ADB supported, and they have accepted the 50 different recommendations. So what this gender audit looked at is the bank's own gender equality agenda in terms of the percentage of a female leadership in the corporate boards or the female employees, as well as their business models towards outreaching the female customers. And so we do the similar thing for the private equity funds. So when they do the screening of their investees further, ADB requires these private equity funds and the banks to look at the gender equality performance of these investees in terms of the gender composition and the business models. So we are creating, in a way, the ecosystem for the banking sector and the private equity fund through this type of an incentive mechanism. Thank you.
Very enriching, and I will quote you on your opening remark that a lot has happened, but not enough has happened. So, very, very true. You've been doing a lot of work within the ADB, trying to integrate the gender into the different work streams of the bank, up to 47%, trying to encourage others, brokering the relationship between commercial banks and women, and the accessibility and the bankability of women with commercial banks, the gender audit that you've been doing for the private equity funds, and many, many more. Before we move to Caroline, I do note that maybe Ambassador Sato, do you need to...
After they have spoken.
Excellent, excellent. So we still have time. We're going to win you for a bit more, because I know that you have an engagement back in the city. Caroline, there is a growing evidence that gender equality and equity is profitable for investments and makes a strong business case. So what are the trends in impact investment do you see as emerging within the space of the gender equality agenda?
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me here today. I think that gender equality is very much at the heart of what AVPN is doing in the region. AVPN, for those of you who are unfamiliar with us, is the unique and largest platform for social investors across Asia. We have over 600 members that come from what we call the spectrum of social investment. So we have foundations and family offices who do grant making. We have corporate foundations who do CSR and share value. We have intermediaries ranging from governments and multilaterals through to universities who are responsible for the ecosystem building within Asia. And then we have the financial services firms, really ranging from the big PE and venture capital all the way through to the smaller impact investment funds. What that means is that, the AVPN mission is to move capital for impact. And when we look at moving capital for impact with a gender lens, or for gender equality, or for improving outcomes for women and girls, we really look at how we can break down the silos between all those different organizations, all those different sectors, all of whom actually are doing quite similar work in many ways. So we're trying to stop people reinventing the wheel. And I thought actually in terms of partnerships and to give you a flavor as to what is happening, I wanted to use some of the examples that were actually brought up today in conversation. So for example, in Korea, many people don't know, but Korea has the most active impact investment market in the region. Korean impact investors are by far away above what others are thinking and how they're thinking about using impact investment. From what we would call the demand side, so social enterprises, again, Korea is leading the way in how they are supporting social enterprises who can scale and be possible impact investment. Yellow Dog, which is one of the Korean investors, is doing a lot around gender lens. So I think that impact investors are now looking at the Southeast Asia region as to how they can move and do similar work in Southeast Asia. I think what we were referring to with gender-based violence, so to kind of take a completely different way. We work with financiers who are thinking about how can you put an ESG lens using gender-based violence for mainstream funds. How do you actually bring financing gender-based violence into a kind of more mainstream private equity, mainstream private capital? It's quite innovative. We did a session on it at our conference. It wasn't that well attended, but the people that were there were very passionate about how to really think through these different issues. Similarly, on the Women's Bank, there are a number of angel investors. Again, this is impact investing, this is investing for impact. There are so many angel investor networks around the region, all supporting women's entrepreneurship, all actively investing in women's entrepreneurship. So the question is, how do we take the Women's Bank in Finland and make sure that they've been connected with these angel investors around the region to actually build up this capacity? For Canada, we've done, the Convergence is one of our members, and you're absolutely right. What they're doing in blended finance is amazing. I think, with the Equality Fund, my challenge to the Canadian government is how do you bring it down to the regions? How do you bring it down onto the ground so that, I've been in conversations with the Equality Fund, but I still feel that, there's so much more that it can be done by actually having conversations with the people who are in this room now to say, what is really needed. And I think the catalyzing women's entrepreneurship, I I think that the opportunities to do things like for e-commerce platforms, which is, as you can see with the Gojeks, the Ubers, the Grabs, you know, in this region, this is where economic growth is happening. How do we work together to create women's economic empowerment through e-commerce platforms? I think that, you know, these are conversations that we're all touching on, and with the ADB Ventures, exactly this idea of mainstreaming gender lens investing. I think that without putting the idea that gender lens investing has to be part of mainstream capital, that we're all demanding to our wealth advisors, to the fund managers, to the governments, that they need to put a gender lens into their investment strategies and portfolios, then nothing's going to happen. And we have the power to do that. So I think that, and just with corporates, I don't know actually what Patrick's going to say, but what I do know is, you know, from a completely different angle, you know, what corporates can do with their supply chains in integrating social enterprises. I mean, I know from the hotel chains, the idea that they can work with women entrepreneurs in their local areas to support in, whether it be with the employment opportunities, with vocational opportunities, supporting vocational schools for hotel and hospitality training, whether it be taking livelihoods from soaps and crafts and putting it into their hotel rooms. I mean, there's a number of different ways that we can think innovatively about how do we take these women entrepreneurship programs and integrate them into corporate supply chains. So hopefully I wanted to just use all the examples of today because I think that it just really shows that all these different perspectives and all these different people working, by partnering, we can really start to move capital for impact in gender. Thank you.
I think you've put it all together very well, and moving from different innovative social financing, from the impact investments to the social enterprise, angel investments, and how are we going to make sure that they are not reinventing the wheel, they are not necessarily doing the same thing in the same spaces. And that needs this type of networking and networks to make sure that we're really capitalizing and ensuring the maximum utilization of this opportunity. Last but not least, we're very, very eager to hear from the private sector, the hotel business. Patrick, how can we encourage companies to create shared value-based partnerships? I think it's from the two sides, from them, but also from our side, how can we pitch more, what is it in it for you, for them, to work better on the financing for the gender equality agenda?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me and to represent the private sector on this panel. Obviously, I feel a bit lonely here, but I have a lot to say, so it's all right. I think, obviously, gender equality is a global issue, and it's very much as important for the private sector, if not more, than, of course, for all the government who are defining the priorities and the strategy. So just a little word about Accor, who we are. For those who don't know us, we are one of the top 3 or 4 companies in the world. We have about 5,000 hotels in about over 100 countries, and we have about 5,000 hotel general managers who are all leaders in their in the community. And I think obviously we have through that a huge reach, you know, in many countries. So I believe that it's very important. We believe at Accor that it's very important to use our own resources, our champions, you know, to drive the goal and to drive this effort. Personally, I am a member of a 6-children family, and I have 3 sisters and we were 3 brothers, so you know we were really equal thanks to my parents. But I must say that I've also had the lucky to have a very great mom who looked after us in a fantastic way, and I think she was raising us, you know, instilling these values in us, all of us, right? And I think I am definitely and although I have some little reserve with the word feminist, but I'm definitely a supporter of the feminine cause. And I'm also personally, I would say, I'm an advocate of that cause and also an activist, because I believe when you believe in something, it's not only a question to just believe in it, but what can you do as a person, right? So, I'm leading about 10 countries here in Asia Pacific, and I have about nearly 40,000 employees in these 10 countries. And I'm also the champion for diversity and inclusion cause for Asia Pacific, so I'm really involved with that. I'm glad actually to be in that position, because it's not a position I raised my hand for, but I was chosen. So that means I must be doing something right, or at least I've got some recognition for doing a few things. So maybe the first thing I can explain is how does Aqua work? I think the way we can raise partnership, or the way we can influence others, other corporations, is really by practicing. It's really walking the talk, right? And I think that's very important because of our leadership in many, many countries. We are the largest operator in Asia Pacific, and in most countries where there are hotels in Asia Pacific, and in particular, of course, in Thailand. So the first thing that Accor did many years ago is to join and sign the Women's Empowerment Principle. That was really the birth, I would say, of our effort, through our two co-founding presidents many years ago. Okay, so this was very important, because I think that led the company, to in the right way from the beginning, and for all employees to understand this is a cause that we are all working for, right? So this is about treating all women and men fairly at work. This is promoting education, training, professional development for women, and so on and so on. All right. Lately, we were one of the founding movement for the he for she movement also. So personally, I joined, of course, and I'm sure that but this movement is all about men, but not only men. Promoting the gender equality. Right. So this is about men who believe in this, and will, through the act, the daily actions, promote women in the workplace, not only in a women's place. Okay, also. So we also created in 2015 a little bit more officially a diversity and inclusion department. Okay, which is based in Paris, obviously, because we are a French company. But we have committees all throughout the regions, right? And we have a committee here in Bangkok for the region. I'm glad to introduce Valérie Barrios, who is our leader for one of the pillars of this committee. We have 5 pillars, which is gender equality, obviously, but also intercultural, person with disability, intergeneration, and also LGBTI cause. Okay, so we believe in these 5 causes, but now we'll talk about the gender equality. So, as I said, through that also we have created also lately what we call our RISE network. This is really specifically to work on the gender equality movement. And we have on a worldwide basis about 14,000 of our employees who have joined already the effort, including 5,000 in Asia Pacific, right? But more than that, I think this network, as I said before, is actually linked directly to all the 5,000 hotels we have. And so there's a lot of people really talking, living, promoting the cause on a daily basis. Because in each of our hotels we have a champion, actually promoting this cause, but not only taking action to talk about it, organizing events, organizing conferences, and really promoting. All right? So through this committee and these movements, we defined a set of priorities for us, for the employees, and the initiatives that we can identify and implement on a worldwide basis. So we adapt and prioritize local initiatives in every country we are. So as I said, we can organize events. We are promoting mentoring program, appointing mentors and mentees to work together to support women progression in the company. We impact on the gender equality champions in hotels. For example, what we do also, we establish attractive and consistent parental benefits across the region, which is go far and beyond what the government are officializing through the Ministry of Labor, right? I think that's very important. So we are far ahead of that. We don't stand behind the government, but we also do more than that to be far ahead. What we do also, one thing also we do is that we train, we invest in development courses for female employees in the company, right? For example, we have a Leadership in Motion for Women development program, Accor invests heavily in training, obviously, because unfortunately our industry has a huge turnover. You know, our industry is one of the biggest and largest employer in the world, you know, with, so obviously we have a lot of people coming through our ranks, and it's important for us to be able to develop our women to reach, and I will talk about it later, the more senior role, executive role in the company. What we do also, through the training program, we try to bridge the confidence gap. And this is something which is very, very important. One thing that we have analyzed also is that one of the reasons why women are not yet on a parity in terms of the executive or top corporate role is because there's a lack of confidence, right? And this comes from generation, from education, from many aspects, but it's very, very important through the mentoring program or through specific training program to give confidence to women, to encourage women to raise their hands, because this is not always the case. And this is where my role as a CEO of the company, of course, becomes very important, or my senior corporate leaders, is actually by identifying female and encouraging them, developing them to raise their hands, to take position, and we are doing, we're doing that. What we do also, we set goals for female leaders, right? So, for example, by the end of 2020, we want to be at 35%, all right? We're still far from parity, obviously, but by the end of 2020, we'll be at 35% of female gender equality in all senior positions. This is top executive, board level, ExCom, or the regional level, right? So we are, and I'm glad to say that last year we improved in my region in particular by 15% the number of women appointed in senior role, which are general managers, directors, vice president, and so on. So it's going in the right direction. Talking about confidence, one of the programs we are doing, for example, is a program called Yes, She Can program, right? And this is a program, it's actually an intensive workshop, a one-day workshop. We partnered with an association who has developed this training course, and we are promoting this throughout our corporation, right? What we do also, we have created a comprehensive gender equality guide for best practices on everything at a hotel level, which is mostly our main operation, from hiring people to parental leave benefits. Plus, we do a yearly self-assessment, which complete in every single hotel, and this self-assessment leads to a specific action plan in all of our hotels. So we can see we are really active. It's not only promoting, having people talking about the cause, it's really putting action in place in all our operations on a worldwide basis. We also joined association. Recently, we joined the Dragonfly movement, which is just established here in Thailand, for example. So we are one of the sponsors of the movement. We were there to support, and I think we'll do more in the future. We are supporting NGOs also in over every country we operate, and specifically for two causes. One is for women, the other one is for children, right? So, for example, at the top of my mind, a movement we are, an NGO we're supporting in Myanmar, where we are actually assisting a single mother in needs, right? So it's really finding just for them, to earn an income to be able to be self-sustainable. One thing we can do also is because we manage hotels on a worldwide basis, but we have many, many partners and investors in hotel. Our job is to convince these partners, these investors, to hire senior female leader. And we can talk about this, but I've been fortunate to travel in over 60 countries. I've worked in many, many continents, in the Middle East, in Africa, in Asia for over 20 years now, of course, beside Europe. And I have seen a lot of inequalities, a lot of suffering for women, obviously. And I think it's important for us. And the status of women in countries do not depend only on the level of development of countries. Of course, I've seen very developed countries where actually the woman cause is actually in a lesser situation than countries which needs to be more developed. So this is really an effort that we have to do in every single country equally.
A lot. But I believe as you started, you're walking the talk. So you've signed on the Women Empowerment Principles. It is something that we will be happy to share with the many of the businesses here in Thailand and in the region. How can we unpack these, but also what you were talking about, using you as an agency to encourage your investors, your partners to follow suit and to do the same. And really guiding by example, where you've been investing money to give more parental leave and benefits, encouraging in the investment of women and dedicating programs for that, etc. So we really hope that soon we would find around 2,500 general managers of Accor as women. We really thank you for, please, Patrick.
I just want to add one thing also, which is very important, obviously, is that we act at different level, not only at the level of the employees, our investors also, but at the level of our employees also. We are in a very competitive world. It's very important for us to attract women to come to work for Accor, and having a diversity and inclusion program, encouraging, of course, these young women to work for us. So this is also one of the reasons why we are very heavily investing also.
Absolutely.
And we were talking earlier about the supply chain. Of course, that's also very, very important, right? So we have thousands of suppliers, and besides, of course, the issue of compliance, one issue also we do, of course, is to encourage young women entrepreneurs, whether in the digital world or whether actually, just regular suppliers.
Thank you, Patrick. Our panelists had a lot to say, and I think it was a very enriching experience. And that's why I did not keep tap on the time. But the end result is that we're not going to have as many and as much opportunity to have an engagement as question and answers. So let me maybe take one round of 3 questions, and then the rest you can catch the panelists outside the room. So if participants here can have, if you have any questions to the panelists, I can see our young youth delegate. Please.
Hi, I'm Shavana from Pakistan, a member of Global Youth Task Force. So I have a question from all the panelists, is that how are you making sure that young people are involved in developing and designing these partnership programs to make them all inclusive and sustainable?
Thank you. Another question, please.
I'm Atas Hendartini Hapsya from Indonesia. I'm interested in your work on hotels. So last year I was in Luxembourg and I stayed at your hotel, and first when I came out my lift, the lift in the hotel, and there is your program. So for me, it was excellent to see your hotel in Luxembourg. And so today, I know that you are coming from French. So because I'm from Indonesia and from Women's Health Foundation, and first, of course, we protect women and girls. And in the hotel sphere, I think we are concerned about in the tourist area that girls are not protected. And so our government in 2010 issuing regulation to look for the protection of girls, because in some tourist area, girls are actually trafficked in this business. So do you hear about this maybe, and how we should protect our girls, not be involved in all kind of business? Thank you.
Thank you. And we will take one last question, and then we will have the opportunity for the panelists to respond. Yeah? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Viola from the Solomon Islands government. I guess my question is more a general question, not so much for a specific panelist. But my question is, I guess now we are at Beijing+25 review, and we will be looking towards the next years of implementation. My question is, around whether there are plans or has this been done before around the costing, costing of documents like the Beijing Declaration. I guess my question around costing is related to, once there are some approximate costing, it could also maybe also inform, partnerships, inform where financing could go, especially, from donors or development partner countries. I ask this question because I come from Solomon Islands, which is a very small developing nation in the Pacific, and sometimes, these international frameworks, commitments, can be quite overwhelming for us in terms of implementation. So, I guess I want some answers. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. So maybe we can start with the question to Patrick, because this was very, it was targeted to you, maybe, and then we can think of who can take the integration of young people into the partnerships. And then I will be happy to attend to the last question myself. So, Patrick.
Thank you. Thank you for raising the question. It's one element which I had note, but I didn't mention. It's obviously very, very important, right? So I think because we have thousands of customers going through the doors of the hotels, the industry is very exposed to what you're talking about, which is really prostitution, but also child prostitution, exploitation also. So what do we do about this? Of course, we keep ourselves informed of what the government are communicating and implementing, the regulation that are being put in place, but we do much more than that. Sexual harassment for employees is a very, very serious issue, which we are tackling very seriously. So a couple of things we've done lately. First, we are, as we speak, we have already implemented in Europe and we are implementing it in Asia. We had a hotel use the pilot in Bangkok, equipping every single woman of a device to be able to call for help if they are being harassed by customers. We are talking about chambermaid, I'm talking about waitresses, because the statistics are really appalling, really appalling. Nearly 50% of the women working in the industry are suffering from sexual harassment. That's a very, very serious issue, right? So first, we want to protect them immediately if there is an issue. The second thing we do also, we communicate a lot, and we have put in place a helpline also to report cases, because it could be an issue of relation between client and an employee, but could also be within the workforce. So we have this anonymous helpline that we have actually developed, and that anybody can call anonymously for help and communicate about a wrong behavior, right? So one thing we're doing also is to train our employees about what the issue that you're talking about, to be able to report a suspect or a behavior which appeared suspicious. So to immediately be able to report to management, to report and to take action as when we can, as soon as possible. So this is the elements that we are doing.
And the second question will be attended by Your Excellency on the integration of young people into the agenda.
Because our ministry is not only working with women, but also with the youth. So because the title of UN Women has promoted generation equality, I think it is very timely conceptualization on generation equality. So for the first approach that I want to do for the youth to be representative, not by representation by seniors, but make their voices to be heard by themselves. So in our ministry, I encourage the other ministries also to invite all the youth to represent by themselves, not via others. So that is one very modest step. And also for that kind of a social enterprise, that is the major playground for the next generation. So sometimes for those kind of new energies and passion were hijacked by big business people. So we want to protect their own some kind of ideas and energy, and their own ownership should be protected by some kind of certain umbrella. So otherwise, many of Korean young people also got frustrated with this kind of new initiatives, were not clearly returned by their own way. So it was usually hijacked by other big sectors. So that is the second concern, that we want to do some kind of generation equality, generation justice, generation equality. So, and also some kind of, there are, especially the young girls and the young women, adolescents, very creative, innovative initiatives were done by this kind of a social enterprise. So I was amazing. It was not based on affirmative action. Whole company are composed of women themselves only, but they made a big progress and the big, so-called big success. So it make women, especially young girls, be very confident in their own internal energy and ideas. So we will share those kind of best practices initiated by women. But those kind of successes usually are dependent on the traditional women's wisdom and the traditional women's work. So they didn't know their own potential ideas and the potential some kind of some energy. So we want to make those kind of best practices to be more visible. In relation with that, including our government, including major international organizations, usually evaluated certain progress by certain quantitative indicator. But most of women's invisible contributions were not properly documented and represented. So we should develop alternative indicator for those kind of women's endeavors to be more visible and properly evaluated. So that is the third challenge I have in mind.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Minister. Ambassador Sato.
Thank you. Just very quickly on the youth participation, something that we've always found very extremely important in the policy making, and we now actually have a law on youth law that the main idea is to ensure that the youth participation is guaranteed at the government, at the national and the sort of a local level. So it actually gives the obligation for the state and municipal authorities to find ways to involve youth in the decision making. Thank you.
Sonoma.
Very quickly, so I talked about the financing, access to finance. So financial literacy at the early stage in education curriculum is very important. So we've been supporting some of the governments across Asia Pacific and in doing that. And as part of also the technical vocation education.
And to the last question from Samoa, I think it's a very timely question, and it's something that we as UN Women, with the Regional Commission here, ESCAP, and the other Regional Commission in West Asia, ESCWA, and our regional office in the Middle East and North Africa are embarking on 2 studies. One is the costing of the commitments of the international norms and standards and conventions. How can we cost for it so we can see what is the ball figure that we can use when we come to financing these agendas. The other one is the cost of inequality at large, and it is something that we're embarking on starting the first quarter of 2020. We really cannot thank you all. It has been a very intense and intensive 2 days. And for those who do not know, the negotiations in the negotiations room finished at 6:30 a.m. this morning. So many of those who are in the room today have not yet slept. It is only a commitment, a sign of the commitment that we all collectively have for the agenda. It's a full room here today. I know that many of you have other commitments, yet you have prioritized to be here today with us. Thank you very, very much. And those others who have come at the last minute because we wanted to ensure to have the panel as diverse and inclusive as possible, we're really very grateful to you. And we look forward that this is a continuum of collaboration between all of us. The last word of appreciation is to the partnership team in UN Women, Isabel Rivera and her team, who have put this panel together very ably. So we do thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Minister. It was a great pleasure. Likewise, yes. Good, yeah. Very nice to see you.